Do you even realize what you're looking at? Old man voice, sharp and dripping with youthful arrogance, sliced through the steady drone of the airfield's power generators. Michael Thorne, lead flight systems engineer, clutched his clipboard tightly to his chest as if it were a shield. His glare locked onto the elderly figure standing near the grounded Chinook. Bruce Carterati, 2 years old, didn't flinch. He kept his eyes fixed on the massive, silent helicopter, his weathered hands, scarred and stained by decades of oil and grease, resting calmly on the railing of the maintenance platform. Thorne shot an exasperated glance at his team of restless technicians, their digital camouflage uniforms a blur of nervous energy. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the aircraft. This is a restricted zone. His tone was louder now, his strained politeness doing little to hide his growing irritation. The engineer's crisp flight suit, covered in patches flaunting his advanced certifications, only emphasized the contrast between him and the old man. Dressed in a faded denim jacket and scuffed leather boots, a muffled snicker escaped one of the younger engineers. The tension on the tarmac hung heavy, as oppressive as the thick summer air. The CH-47F Chinook multi-million-dollar marvel of modern aviation remained stubbornly still, its hulking frame refusing to come alive. For 6 relentless hours, Thorne and his elite team had swarmed over the grounded aircraft. Their laptops and digital multimeters clung to its intricate systems like lifelines, the engineers probing its circuits with the urgency of doctors diagnosing an alien illness. This was no ordinary crew. They were the top graduates from the nation's most prestigious engineering programs, personally selected for this rapid deployment unit. Their mission was simple in theory, but brutal in execution: keep these flying giants in the sky. Yet this Chinook, crippled by some phantom fault buried deep in its circuitry, was making them look incompetent. Each diagnostic run spat out only a maddening string of vague error codes. They had already swapped out 3 major components, rebooted the entire avionics suite more times than Thorne could count, and combed through schematics so tangled they resembled the blueprint of a city. Still nothing. The twin turbine engines, capable of hauling tons of cargo and scores of troops, refused even to begin their pre-flight checks. Pressure was mounting by the minute. Inside the Chinook's cavernous belly lay cargo too vital to wait, crates of medical supplies bound for a field hospital. Every hour lost was another hour that wounded and sick soldiers went without aid. A colonel had already made 2 appearances, his visits growing sharper, his questions more pointed with each return. Thorne felt the weight of it pressing down on him, this single failure staining an otherwise flawless record. His frustration simmered dangerously. He no longer saw the old man as just another bystander. To him, Bruce Carter was the embodiment of the problem itself, a relic standing in the way of his sleek, digital world of fiber optics and precision engineering. "Hey Pops, need a wrench? Maybe you can knock some sense into it," one of the younger techs called out, earning a ripple of uneasy laughter from the others. Thorne silenced them with a hard glare, but the insult still lingered in the air, like smoke. To the team, the old man was nothing more than a distraction and anachronism in a world of fiber optics and digital READO, UTS. At last, Bruce Carter turned. His pale, clear blue eyes swept over the group of flustered engineers. He didn't look offended. If anything, he seemed detached, as though he were listening to something none of them could hear. His gaze lingered on the laptops, on the tangle of diagnostic cables and glowing screens, before drifting back to the hulking, silent helicopter. Bruce had lived inside these machines for more than 40 years through the jungles of Vietnam, across the deserts of the Middle East. He knew Chinooks not as assemblies of parts, but as living, temperamental creatures with moods, quirks, and stubborn streaks. This one, he sensed, wasn't broken. It was resisting. "You're listening to the wrong thing," Bruce murmured, his gravelly voice almost lost beneath the whine of generators and the restless noise of the airfield. Thorne stepped closer, his expression twisting into disbelief. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" "The computers," Bruce clarified, nodding toward the rows of equipment. "They'll tell you what they think is wrong, but they don't tell you what the bird is actually trying to say." For a heartbeat, Thorne was speechless. Then the absurdity of the statement triggered a rush of anger. "The bird, sir, this is a highly complex piece of military hardware, not a pet. My team and I are the most qualified people on this base to deal with it. We don't need folklore, we need results. This aircraft must be operational." Bruce didn't rise to the bait. His eyes drifted to the small, weathered leather pouch at his belt. His fingers brushed the soft, worn flap before he looked back at the Chinook's engine housing. His posture changed, focused, analytical, a man seeing beyond steel and wiring, peering into the soul of the machine itself. He ignored Thorne's tirade. Instead, he let instinct and memory guide him. He could feel the misalignment, sensed the tiny mechanical dissonance that the computers were too sophisticated and too blind to register. This wasn't a problem for an algorithm. It required touch. It required feel. The hydraulic sequencing and the aft rotor transmission, Bruce muttered, almost to himself. "It's out of sync. Just a fraction." The sensors read it as a catastrophic fault, so the ignition cycle won't even start. Thorne actually laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. Impossible. We've run a full diagnostic on the hydraulics 3 times. Pressures are nominal across the board. The system is fine. His finger trembled as he jabbed it toward Bruce. I've had enough. Leave this flight line now. If you're still here in 30 seconds, I'll have the MPs drag you out. Bruce's calm never wavered. He simply looked at Thorne, eyes holding a flicker of something pity. Perhaps the young engineer was brilliant, but blind. He was trying to read a story by analyzing the chemical makeup of the ink and paper without ever seeing the words. From the pouch, Bruce drew a small, peculiar wrench. The tool gleamed faintly in the fading light. Forged from dark burnished metal, its custom bent handle was wrapped in frayed, weathered leather, clearly shaped by decades of use. It wasn't regulation. It wasn't even modern. It looked like something a blacksmith might have crafted a century ago. Thorne's lip curled in open contempt as he stared at it. It was the most archaic, unprofessional thing Thorne had ever witnessed on a modern flight line. Rage surged in his chest, hot and bitter. This farce was a mockery of everything he stood for. A lifetime devoted to precision, to science, to the hard-won discipline of engineering, reduced to a circus act by an old man and his ridiculous homemade tool. That wrench wasn't just an eyesore. To Thorne, it was an insult to his training, to his team, to the very principles of modern aviation itself. But to Bruce Carter, the wrench was something else entirely. The sight of it in his hand cracked open a memory not of words, but of sensations. The shriek of incoming mortars, the suffocating humidity of a jungle landing zone under fire. The hollow, stuttering thwump-thwump of failing rotor blades above. A pilot barely 20 years old, his face ghost pale with fear, shouting that they'd lost hydraulics, that the bird was going down. Bruce could still feel it, his body wedged into the cramped transmission bay, drenched in hot, stinging hydraulic fluid. That very wrench biting into his palm, its weight an extension of his will. No manual, no algorithm, just instinct. He'd bypassed a shattered valve, rerouted the flow, and brought the Chinook back to life. Just as enemy soldiers broke through, the Line 14 men had lived because of that tool. He had forged it himself, decades earlier. From the landing gear of a wrecked Huey. Over time, it had become more than steel and leather. It was memory. It was instinct. It was a witness to 1,000 impossible saves. To Bruce, it wasn't just a tool. It was part of him. While Thorne fumed and postured, Air Force Staff Sergeant Evans stood near the cargo pallet, uneased, knowing. At him, he'd spent 10 years on flight lines. Seen plenty of arrogant officers and engineers come and go, but something about the old man felt different. There was a gravity to him, a calm authority that outshone Thorne's bluster. Evans thought of his grandfather, a retired Chinook crew chief, who used to tell stories about the rotor heads and grease wizards of the old days, who could diagnose an engine by sound alone, who carried custom-forged tools like talismans, and who treated their birds like living things. Looking at Bruce, Evans felt as though one of those legends had stepped out of the stories and onto this very tarmac. Thorne's sneering contempt, his puffed-up chest and escalating threats, felt wrong. Not just disrespectful wrong, a violation of an unspoken code Evans had grown up believing in. And as he watched Thorne square up for what was clearly meant to be his final ultimatum, Evans realized the young engineer was about to cross a line. Someone had to stop him. Breaking away from the growing cluster of onlookers, Evans slipped behind a line of equipment and pulled out his phone. His pulse hammered in his ears. There was one number stored in his contacts that he had sworn never to dial: Major General Matthews' private cell. Years earlier, when Evans had served as the general's driver, Matthews had handed him that number with a single instruction: only call me if something is so wrong it can't wait. This was one of those moments. His thumb shook slightly as he tapped the number. The call was picked up on the second ring. Matthews, the voice was clipped, sharp, impatient. General Matthews, Sir, Staff Sergeant Evans. What is it, Sergeant? I'm in a meeting. Evans swallowed. Apologies for the interruption. Sir, it's about the Chinook grounded on runway 4, the one carrying the medical supplies. I'm well aware of it, the general snapped, and Mr. Thorne's team is failing to impress me. Don't waste my time with status reports. No, sir, it's not that. Evans hesitated, searching for words that didn't sound insane. Sir, there's a civilian here. Thorne is about to have him arrested. But I think he knows what's wrong with the helicopter. He looks like he belongs here. Even as he said it, Evans cringed at how absurd it sounded. Then he added, almost desperately, Sir, the name on his jacket. It's Carter, Bruce Carter. Inside the base command building, Major General Matthews sat at the head of a long polished table. A tense video conference with the Pentagon flickering. Across the screen in front of him, they were discussing logistics already under strain because of the grounded Chinook. When his private cell, the one reserved for true emergencies, buzzed, he silenced it with a glare. When it rang again, he excused himself, already bracing for whatever disaster could justify the interruption. He listened to Evans' stammered explanation, his irritation growing by the second. A civilian. On his flight line, a breach of security, he was ready to tear into the Sergeantine till 2 words stopped him cold. Bruce Carter. The change in Matthews was immediate and unmistakable. His impatience drained away, replaced by a look of raw disbelief as though someone had told him a ghost was standing outside. He sat straighter, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles went white. The other officers in the room exchanged puzzled looks. Their commander, normally unflappable, now seemed shaken to his core. For Matthews, the name was not just familiar, it was legendary. Bruce Carter was the mechanic spoken of in hushed tones, in hangars and classrooms. A man whose uncanny intuition had saved aircraft and lives in situations manuals could never cover. A figure whispered about as if he were myth. The rotor wizard, who could bring a dying bird back to life with nothing but instinct and a handful of battered tools. Matthews had heard the stories as a young lieutenant. He'd believed Carter, long retired, lost to a quiet obscurity. And now, to hear he was not only alive but standing on his runway, threatened with arrest by some overeager engineer, young enough to be his grandson, sent a chill straight through him. Sergeant Evans, Matthews said at last, his voice low and dangerously calm. Keep him there. Do not, under any circumstances, let that man leave. And do not allow anyone to lay a hand on him. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Evans breathed, relief rushing through him. I'm on my way. The general ended the call and faced the silent, bewildered conference room. This meeting is over, he declared, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no challenge. He was already striding for the door, his aide scrambling to keep pace. Get my vehicle now, and pull the service record for Chief Warrant Officer 5, Bruce Carter. Active or retired. I want it on my tablet before we reach the runway. Back on the tarmac, Thorne was nearing his breaking point. The old man's silent defiance, more than any argument, gnawed at his authority. Around them, technicians and flight crew had abandoned their work, drawn into the strange standoff. Thorne could feel their eyes on him, waiting, judging. He had to reassert control. That's it, he snapped, his voice cutting across the tarmac. Remove this man immediately. He pointed to the 2 nearest Air Force security personnel. If you have to arrest him, then arrest him. He's interfering with a critical mission. Thorne took a final, menacing step toward Bruce. You had your chance, old man. You brought this on yourself with you in that ridiculous little toy. His hand flicked dismissively at the odd wrench dangling from Bruce's grip. So consumed was Thorne with his own righteous fury that he failed to notice the faint rise of sirens in the distance, or the flashing lights racing across the airfield. A convoy of black command vehicles tore across the tarmac, scattering birds and startled personnel in their path. The first sign that something had changed came in the form of a collective gasp from the crowd. Thorne turned, irritation etched on his face at yet another distraction. Then his expression collapsed into stunned disbelief. 3 black SUVs skidded to a halt, led by the base commander's official vehicle, its 2-star flag snapping from the fender. The doors swung open, before the engines had even died, and out stepped Major General Matthews. His face was a thundercloud of restrained fury as he emerged, command staff close behind a colonel and 2 majors matching his urgent stride. Their pace alone carried the weight of crisis. Sending a ripple down the entire flight line, technicians froze where they stood, spines snapping straight. Security forces instinctively straightened, hands falling away from their holsters. The air itself seemed to bristle with authority, sharp and suffocating. A knot of dread twisted in Thorne's gut. Never had he seen the base general move with such speed or wear such an expression of cold, controlled wrath. General Matthews' eyes swept the scene, hard and unyielding as carved granite. He passed over the engineers, the security detail, even the billion-dollar helicopter, all dismissed in an instant. His gaze locked instead on the old man in the weathered denim jacket. Thorne wasn't even an afterthought. To the general, he may as well have been a piece of forgotten ground equipment. Matthews strode directly toward Bruce Carter, each step heavy with inevitability. The crowd held its breath, bracing for the detonation. Instead of erupting, the general halted 2 feet from Bruce, his posture rigid, shoulders squared like stone. In the charged silence of the airfield, his voice cut through with clarity as he snapped his hand upward in the sharpest, most precise salute Thorne had ever witnessed. Chief Warrant Officer Carter, he said, his tone carrying a reverence that seemed almost impossible. It is an honor, sir. Bruce raised his own hand slowly, almost with reluctance, returning the gesture. To warriors separated by generations met in silent recognition. The sight was so jarring, so utterly unexpected, that a ripple of whispers stirred through the onlookers. Thorne's mind locked, refusing to process what was unfolding before his eyes. When General Matthews lowered his hand, he did not relax. He remained at rigid attention, his gaze sweeping the crowd, though his words cut directly toward Thorne. For those of you who do not know, he thundered, his voice filling the tarmac. You stand in the presence of a living legend. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Bruce Carter, the man who wrote half the maintenance manuals for the CH-47 platform. and the man who trained many of the very instructors who taught you how to do your jobs. He shifted one step aside, still unyielding in his bearing. In Vietnam, during the Tet Offensive, then Warrant Officer Carter's Chinook took a direct hit to its main gearbox while inserting a Special Forces team under heavy fire. Instead of crashing, he kept that aircraft aloft for 20 minutes under constant enemy attack, manually lubricating the gears with water from his own canteen, long enough to get the team out alive. By all rights, that bird should have fallen apart in the sky. A collective gasp rippled through the younger airmen. In Grenada, the general pressed on. His voice rising, he diagnosed a complete electrical failure in the middle of a hurricane armed with nothing but a flashlight and a piece of wire. He brought that bird back online and rescued an entire platoon of rangers who had been cut off by a mudslide. He paused, letting the weight of the history hang heavy over the flight line. We stand here today with this aircraft because of the knowledge this man gained, the sacrifices he made, and the miracles he performed when technology either did not exist or had failed entirely. He has forgotten more about this helicopter than most of us will ever know. At last, Matthew's cold, granite-like gaze fixed directly on Thorne. The general's words cut through the air like a blade. And you, Mr. Thorne, you were about to have him arrested. Silence swallowed the flight line. Thorne's face drained of all color, his anger collapsing into shock and humiliation. The clipboard slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the tarmac. For the first time, he truly looked at Bruce Carter not as an old man in a worn jacket, but as a giant standing quietly in their midst. General Matthews stepped in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Your team, with all your degrees in diagnostic computers, has been stuck for 6 hours. This man, the very legend you dismissed, likely knew the problem before he even got out of his truck this morning. Then, turning back to Bruce, the general's tone softened. Chief, I apologize for the disrespect you've endured on my base. If you're willing, would you show these children how it's done? Bruce Carter gave a simple, steady nod. He didn't look at Thorne or even at the general. His eyes were fixed on the helicopter. That was all that mattered. They listened too hard with their eyes. He said quietly, an engine has a voice. You have to learn to listen with your hands. He moved toward the aft pylon, the crowd partying instinctively before him. Placing one hand on the cool metal skin, he closed his eyes, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then he motioned to a young technician, barely 18. Give me a hand, son. We just need to bleed some pressure from the number 2 actuator sequence valve. It's binding. He offered the strange, old wrench. The young tech took it with trembling hands, like it was a sacred relic. Bruce guided him with calm precision, his voice, the voice of a teacher passing down a lifetime of hard-earned wisdom. In 5 minutes, Bruce and the young airman accomplished what Thorne's entire team, backed by millions of dollars in technology, could not do in 6 hours. The wrench itself carried a story, a remote firebase on the Cambodian border. Bruce was just a kid, then a young warrant officer with a gift for machines. A rocket attack had torn through their maintenance tent, destroying nearly every tool they had. A Chinook lay crippled at the perimeter, another casualty of the attack. Bruce salvaged a piece of its landing gear strut-hardened steel alloy. For 2 days, armed with a blowtorch and a sledgehammer, he shaped it into the tool he needed to bring his own bird back into the fight. That wrench, born of desperation and ingenuity, became a symbol of his creed. Use what you have, never give up, and always listen to the machine. The fallout was immediate. Thorne and his engineering team were formally reprimanded. Thorne himself was reassigned to a desk job, rewriting training manuals. The incident became a case study at aviation schools across the armed forces. A new module was added to the curriculum, the Carter method of intuitive diagnostics, a hands-on philosophy that stressed listening, feeling, and respecting the machine as much as the data. General Matthews made it law on his base. Every new recruit would hear the story of Bruce Carter, a permanent lesson in humility and respect for those who came before. 3 months later, Thorne found Bruce in the base museum, quietly polishing the plexiglass nose of an old Huey. Thorne was no longer in a flight suit, but a plain service uniform. He stood in silence for a long time before speaking. Sir, he said finally, his voice stripped of arrogance. They're teaching us about you now. Bruce paused, lowering the reg. There was no smugness in his eyes, only quiet understanding. I was wrong, Thorne admitted. The words were heavy. I was arrogant. I leaned so hard on technology that I forgot what it was all for. He hesitated, then asked softly, that wrench, would you show me how you made it? Bruce studied him, really studied him, and no longer saw the proud officer from the flight line, but a student ready to learn. A faint smile touched his lips. He nodded toward a nearby workbench. Pull up a chair, he said. Let's talk about how to listen.